us a little. So first of all, just thank you for jumping on the line, and maybe if you could back up and tell us a little bit about yourself and these two organizations that you founded and are pushing forward.
Yeah, absolutely. So in 2010, I started a computer vision company called Immersive, and we focused on emotion expression recognition. So that means we used basic web cameras to determine someone's age, gender, and their emotions. Worked in that company out of New York City from the Techstars incubator, sold the company in 2015.
Yeah.
Then moved to San Francisco, where I worked at a venture fund, working with about a dozen companies on their go-to-market and their product development, fundraising. And then from there, worked as a consultant on a number of projects from VR headsets to 3D body scanning and IoT wearables. So I've been in the emerging tech space for about the last 15 years.
Wow, that's great. And so what kind of you to start? Well, I guess which came first, Blackbox, the foundation, or Blackbox AI? And how are those two things related? And how did you get those two kicked off?
Yeah, when I was in California, I was doing the rounds of meeting with companies, big tech companies, looking for what I thought was the next step in my career, which was getting a job at, Google or whatnot. And then after I interviewed a number of people there and talking to them what the work is like, it was just very obvious to me I was not a good fit. So you have the guy at Google who makes the slider bar, or the guy who has like the Google Maps pizza category, and that's his only job all day. And in my role, I would have been, going back and forth from East Bay to Mountain View. It would have been just a terrible experience for me personally, just what I'm used to as a founder and having been an entrepreneur. So I recognize there are only like three main paths in life. For most knowledge workers, you have the soul-sucking corporate job, which is about 80% of the population. Only a few people actually really enjoy what they do. Then you have another path, which is you have the, I'm going to be a freelancer, solo entrepreneur, solo practitioner. But then you have to wear all the hats and you have the feast and famine income cycle.
Yeah.
And then I recognize the other path is you could be a startup, but then you could, you work a decade to make what you could have made at the soul-sucking job and then give 80% of that to a VC. So I decided that neither one of those paths were really ideal, and that there are some upsides to a big company, like having access to resources, having access to a larger team, having, just the culture, all of that thing, but you don't have the autonomy and you don't have the trust that I think you really appreciate in a smaller, solo practitioner role. Yeah. But then you have the downside. So how can we the question was how I started bringing this up to a number of people, having conversations with them. And we're like, how do we take the downsides of working at a company and change the structure, just change the incentives and really rethink things. And so we went down that journey about a year ago. Now we're about 60 people from Google, Apple, Intel, Microsoft, focusing on the future of work. And so that's really the ethos behind what we believe. And we recognize that there are two different audiences in this. One is you have one group of people that need help understanding what is AI, what is blockchain, how do I get started? Yeah. I've already invested into IoT sensors and they're embedded in places, but I don't know what to do with the data. Or help me find multiple needles across multiple haystacks. It's basically what they're saying. I have a business case and I don't know how to connect it to a capability. So we have that group, and we recognize that is a very different audience. They're not going to care necessarily about tokens or crypto or anything else. Right. And what we decided to do is really focus Blackbox AI on helping companies with ideation all the way through implementation of these new emerging solutions that really have been around for about 60 years. So it's helping companies really get started there. The foundation was really built around, we need to have an overseeing body that's a nonprofit for this whole thing, because we can't just have another company as a status quo. If we're going to really do this, let's do this right. And so let's build Blackbox AI as a proof of business model. So Blackbox AI is an affiliate of the foundation. And it's a proof of business model, and what its sole purpose is to validate this new form of boosted capitalism that we're promoting. And the foundation is there to educate, promote, facilitate, train, and really kind of foster that relationship and build that in this new economy of crypto and blockchain and all those things. So very different audience than Blackbox AI. Does that make sense?
It does. So yeah, absolutely. So you're using Blackbox AI as a way. Just to repeat back to what you're saying, that's really just that a demonstration of how this new methodology can be successful. This new methodology work can be successful. It's interesting, you talked about how this technology has really been around for quite some time. Why do you think it's just now starting to have an impact and take shape?
There was a lot of hype in the the 60s around AI and what could be possible with perceptrons and all this stuff. And then AI winter came about when we realized that we just had some real basic limitations, and that when people realized the machines aren't going to suddenly become conscious, and then a lot of the research money went away. And over the last, actually, when I started in computer vision, it was 2008, just experimenting with OpenCV. And so now it's emerged, it's come along quite a ways. And so you're able to do things that were previously thought of to be very, very difficult, or would take much, much longer than what they have. And so even the techniques that we used, trying to identify what a face looks like, and we had to identify the difference between an old man face and a young baby face, and some of those challenges. So now you're seeing things that are amazing, like the deep fake example, where you can actually have somebody say something, look like they're saying something, and it's not them. And so we're in the next 10 years, we're going to start seeing this technology really start changing the world. You can't believe your eyes. So with machines' ability to see, it's kind of what we're at.
The research, the funds for the research has kind of kicked up coming out of this AI winter. But so you're seeing a lot of just capabilities advancing, people becoming more comfortable-ish with this technology.
Well, I think there are only a few really key experts in the space that have experience doing it. A majority of people in AI really don't know what AI is. It's really a marketing term. And so the term gets conflated and it gets misunderstood. But you have a large majority of people now that are just getting started in machine learning, but the ones that have actually built and worked with them, I think, are probably fewer and far between. So there's a big talent gap at the moment. But what we're seeing is that there's a lot of people interested in this space, and it's probably the next industrial advancement that probably the closest thing we can look back is electricity. That's how prevalent AI will be through our life over the next few decades. So I think we're going to see this happening more and more, and it's not just going to affect blue collar. It's going to affect white collar now. So it's actually technology that can solve for repetitive tasks and lead to huge changes in how companies can be efficient. So I think that's the concern, is that now you have we're at the top of the economic heap at the moment. We have stock market at record prices, but what happens at the next downturn when everyone wants to do automation? So I think that's really the concern, is that this tech is so good now, it could replace huge portions of the job population.
Well, and just to kind of go back to the basics to some degree, I mean, but I'm glad you called out the gap in understanding of what AI is. How would you define AI?
Probably better to describe what AI is not. Because it's not conscious. It's not alive. It's our need to anthropomorphize these technologies because they have this semblance of being alive. You can talk to Siri and all these other things. These are really clever ways to do very specific things. So what the technology is good at, it's like you have a high diver, you have a shot put, you have the cross trek person or whatever in the Olympics. And so it's kind of like that. You have technologies or algorithms that are very good at very specific things. So now we have what's called narrow AI. We don't have a general AI that's good at everything. And that's if you were to take the most sophisticated AI techniques and you stack them up with deep learning, being kind of at the top, you have a mechanical Turk person. They're orders of magnitude smarter than any AI. So I think what people need to realize is that AI is really good at very narrow, specific, defined things where it can solve problems. And it's not a one and done solution. It's something that has to be trained over a period of time. So it's like a seed and grow system, often lost on people. It's not a box you grab and put it in your assembly line. It's not a software suite that you install. It's something you train over and over and over and over again. And it learns from those patterns, but it takes a human to do that.
Let's talk about blockchain a little bit. Tell me, if you could just kind of break down the basics there and how you guys are using it at the foundation. And are you guys incorporating blockchain solutions into Blackbox AI as well?
Blockchain is really just a distributed database. Right. At the very end of the day, that's really all it is. And we see it as a potential to do something that can aid in something that's very unique. It has some unique properties. One is the immutable ledger. So having something that you can have a transparent ledger that cannot be altered, shared among a network of people, we think that's a very interesting idea. especially to enable some of the things and the philosophies that we've been talking about. And so in order to do that, in order to have a decentralized model for the future of work, you have to have an operating system. How do you coordinate people? How do you match people to projects? How do you validate? How do you deal with reputation? How do you deal with dispute resolution, governance, all of these other challenges? And what we recognize is that as individual people, we're all self-employed anyway. And I want to just work for myself, but I don't want to be alone, and I want a tribe. And what I need are resources. I need skilled talent. I need access to leads. I need access to opportunity. And I need better tools to collaborate with those people. And so by building our organization on the blockchain, we're providing access to these things in an interoperable way with other people in the part of the alliance. So we have about a dozen groups right now that are part of this alliance, and they need help with AI, they need help with blockchain, and we help connect the dots for them. So they may start with IoT, but that's kind of where they end. And once you have the sensors in a place, how do you make sense of that data? And so they would want to connect with us. And we believe that interoperability was really an important piece of this, and that's where the token comes in, is making that an enabler for the ecosystem.
How do you see, from a corporate standpoint, organizations adopting these technologies to advance their work solutions?
Yeah, very interesting question. That is probably the number one challenge that I face, or that when I talk to people, is just mindset. And there is this idea that it's a top-down hierarchical. I have a fiduciary responsibility to my shareholders.
Right.
That's the mindset, I think, of most executives in this space. And at this moment, what you're seeing is that new technology is being developed that is scaring the pants off of many industries, from Google to Amazon to Uber, WeWork, in the manufacturing and the furniture industry, for example. Mm-hmm. So you're having all of these examples of disruption. And many of these companies are realizing and waking up to the fact that, I should probably be looking at these tools as a way to find more relevant information, to make more timely decisions on my data. But there's also an aspect of it that it's just sexier. It's cooler to want to work as an employee, as a person that is wanting to be put my life force into something, with a group of people that are doing something that I find meaningful and valuable. And what many companies are missing is that if they're only chasing profit for profit's sake, there's actually data that's showing it's like 4x greater ROI return for companies that have a social purpose, because you attract customers, because you attract talent to an organization that's actually really geared towards something more than just for making money. The technology piece of it is very interesting, because companies are trying to adapt quickly, and they just need to understand, where do I get started and how does this work? I think that's probably where most companies are. They exist somewhere in 2002 on average, and they're trying to get to today, much less 20 years from now. On the cultural side, the mindset is really, I'm your parent. I tell you what to do. I tell you where to be. I tell you where to sit. I tell you when to check in, when to check out. And really, the quality of your work is based on your manager. So what we're working on doing is building a solution where you don't require a manager. You don't require the oversight. And you only can be able to do that when you standardize a method of value, of determining value. And so that's why we built a protocol to actually standardize the SOW. The SOW is something that's used across many organizations. It's subjective. There's no standardization around it, but it is a critical piece of determining margin, value, ROI for the entire organization. And most times that's actually where value is lost, because they fail to correctly estimate the SOW in working with the client. So that's just kind of some of the things that we've noticed.
Where would you say those key points are in terms of human to AI interaction and training, and how does that impact how you assign value?
I think that most people, when they go to their school, they're taught about theory. And in reality, when you get out of school, the majority of your time is not actually spent on theory. You're spending time actually tagging images, you're cleaning data. It's really kind of grunt work. And I think it's missed on many people. For example, we were doing face recognition we grabbed images from dating sites. We had to clean all the images. We had to tag where the eyes were, where the mouth and the nose were. We would have to build a negative data set, on all the things that were not faces, like hubcaps and trees, wall mountains. And that is something that is missed on so many people. The fact that you have to feed in so much of this information into a machine. But then now we're getting to this next step where the machine can actually go out and find the information and then interpret that it's a cat. And so we're getting into this really interesting next phase of things. But what many companies don't recognize, it's not the deep learning stuff that's really, that's transformational, but it's where not really all the value necessarily is. It could be in these very simple things, these rules-based engines. It doesn't even necessarily have to be deep learning to see some of the gains. I think that's what many people kind of miss on AI, is that it's not as a forgive the pun, but not a black box as much as they think it is. It's not as mysterious. It's not as mystical, and I think it kind of tends to carry that allure of mystique around it.
Right. So it's kind of a lot of this is about pulling back the curtain and seeing the whiz behind the guy pulling the levers. It just takes a feeding, and people overlook that.
Yeah, I think so. And we're also pretty conditioned to think about how things get done today. I want something done, I go buy a box, I put it on my assembly line. If I want a software solution, I go buy it and it works. But when you think of AI, how do you train your staff to now interface with an intelligent agent? How do you how do you readjust your supply chain when a customer changes an order so that you don't have dollars held up in inventory? That's AI. And so it's really it's being able to make decisions that are repetitive. They're low cost, low judgment, low cost of mistake, and starting there as a base, and then working to get quick wins as you go through, and then finding other areas of improvement. It is very much a seed and grow system. You're going to be best in an organization to find quick starts, quick wins where you can prove the validity of it. Through usually a POC. You get to, if you have let's say you're doing an autonomous vehicle and you have a fleet, you're doing fleet management, start with just a few, get some insights, get some data, prove it. And then from there you can expand. But really, as an organization, you need to have that champion, and it usually starts at the top.
How does this change the focus on, for just the everyday human, and what kind of skill sets they should be building and what kind of work they should be taking on?
I think the days of getting paid $60,000, $70,000 a year to fold boxes in a factory are largely over. So for generations, we had that, and we had lifetime employment, and you had this idea of a pension, and I think those things are largely going away, and they have been for many, many years. So this is nothing new. But what we're seeing now is that more than just mechanical muscle with the ability to move cars and spot weld and do those things. Now we have mechanical minds. So where you're seeing repetitive tasks in accounting, in clerical work, in administrative, all of those things are now at risk of being automated. And so now when you have, let's look at the state of Michigan, for example, we have a record low unemployment. If we wanted to bring a new factory in here right now, we couldn't, because we don't have the people to employ to put them in that factory. So we have kind of a hindrance from an economic development perspective, because we can't bring in any more factories, but they're going to keep doing their economic development thing anyway. But what's really going to happen is when you have an economic downturn, all of the jobs that now couldn't be fulfilled with people are being automated because they have extra capital to do that. And when the downturn hits, all those jobs will just be gone. They won't be filled again. And so we're seeing kind of a new change where the automation is going from what we've seen traditionally in blue collar work to also now into accounting, to legal, doctors. It's gonna expand the economic spectrum, and that's what's challenging to that, is that it's going to start creeping up the sophistication ladder, and the economic rungs of the learn ladder are already being cut from the bottom of people that don't have those skills and don't have that sophistication. And so right now the biggest challenge is learning to unlearn. It's a great Alvin Toffler quote. He says that the illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. And that is just such a telling quote for our time. We have to unlearn these habits of culture, of retro bias of how things worked in the industrial age, and somehow, forecasting that it'll work for us in the future. Because I can tell you, the next decade will look nothing like the last decade. It's just going to be completely different.
You mentioned how a lot of those, you mentioned repetitive tasks are kind of the low-hanging fruit for a lot of this stuff. Which, does that suggest that for the knowledge worker, their focus should be less on creating repeatable systems and kind of tweaking and managing and holding on to that system? It's more about moving into the uncertain or the chaos and off to order out of that so you can hand it off to some of these technologies.
That's probably what we're seeing more of. It's let's go broad rather than deep. It's how do I find how do I connect the dots between these seemingly random events, things, and people?
Right.
That's where AI is not good at. That's where humans can excel. And it's our ability to do this critical problem solving that will help us to advance. So having a broad understanding of various things within your organization is actually probably more helpful in the age of AI than it would be being a deep domain expert in one particular thing.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. So a bit of a philosophical question for you, I guess. But, earlier you mentioned a couple of things. One was, this desire for people to kind of find their tribe or build a community within their work. You also talked about how, and I can't remember the term you used, but you've talked about how you won't be able to trust your eyes the way that you can today. How you might hear you can be looking at someone, hearing them speak, but it's actually a completely different person, and you're using technologies to kind of essentially wrap them. How does that? It's a trust question, right? So on one hand, you have technology that you could argue is lessening your ability to trust what you see, hear, and therefore think and feel. It creates an illusion for you that makes it hard to trust things. And on the other hand, we'll still strive to create communities. How does this impact the trust that is so vital in work, creating good work?
Yeah, there's amazing technology on the horizon, like Lyrebird, and you have deep fake, and a lot of that's based on facial expression recognition that I worked on 6, 7, 8 years ago. And so that stuff has really come a long way. When you think of trust, think of it this way. You have kind of the Trust 1.0 network. So imagine a few 100,000 years ago, your tribe was really the people that looked like you, they sounded like you, what's their last name, where did they come from, what's their religion, what's their skin color, really that was kind of like the mindset of trust, that you had a massive social risk by bringing outsiders into your group of trust. So that was Trust 1.0. And I would say that's probably by and large what we have in small town America.
Right.
Then you go to Trust 2.0. Trust 2.0 is really where you have cities, people that have come together in this kind of melting pot of cultural differences. And they've managed to build trust around a new kind of ethos, which is more so the, how eloquently do you speak? Of course, you still have elements of the old world, not saying it's a complete utopia, but you have things like, how eloquently do you speak? What's your background? What are your accomplishments? It's more merit-based. Mm-hmm. Trust 3.0 is going to be built on the blockchain. So now that I don't have to necessarily, we can verify the authenticity of a video or an image or an audio. We can verify the authenticity of an individual, of a transaction, and we don't necessarily have to rely on these older trust networks. Now we're kind of in a transitionary phase between all three of these, honestly. Yeah. But what we're seeing is that this is all happening at once. Before we had generations to transition from farmer to factory worker and to professional services. Now we're doing this intergenerationally, and it's a fascinating time to be alive. And there's not one single area in work that won't be impacted by this.
That makes sense. How does this impact the way that it's interesting to think about the multi-generational aspect of this transition and how it relates to collaboration? Because, we have so many different generations in the workforce today. How do you see this shaping the way people collaborate?
In the old way of work, I talked to my dad. He's 85 years old, and he would tell me these stories. He would work to fill his belly. That was the need for work. It was not necessarily to fill your need for self-fulfillment or self-actualization. And that's really where we are now, is we feel, kind of met the lower needs of Maslow's hierarchy. And as a generation like the millennials and Gen Z's coming up after us, we're seeing a need to I want more than just a paycheck. I want to feel fulfilled. I want to develop myself. I want to feel like I'm creating impact. And I know that these things can be really looked at as a foofy kind of thing. But as we've, managed to solve things like, mass production, in the 80s when we grew up, we grew up blowing dust out of video game cartridges. Now we have supercomputers in our pockets. So right. This age of abundance has really advanced much faster than people have thought and anticipated. And so we've come now where I don't necessarily need to worry about some of these lower needs, and I want to focus on becoming the best I can be. And so where do you go for that? Do you go to a job? Do you go to a freelance gig? Or do you do a startup? What are the options available? And so we recognize the need. Let's build a brand new alternative for people that want to be independent, that want to maintain autonomy, that want a tribe, that want support of the large organization, and to be a part of a larger distribution of upside that they couldn't get as an employee or a contractor. And so that's why we put everything together into Blackbox.
So with that in mind, do you see the gig economy, do you see it as something that's going to continue to grow? Or do you think there's a cap to it?
I think we are seeing stats that the gig economy is growing. I think it's partially due to being forced. I think it's probably different dynamics across different geographic regions of the world. But I think out of necessity, workers are realizing that they don't necessarily have to rely on selling their labor, their life force to an employer who then marks it up and then keeps the surplus. And people are recognizing the tax laws are far more favorable to being independent. But there are a lot of other downsides. You can't get a loan. You need a W-2 to get a loan. Right. Getting a bank loan for a house or any of those other things. And so there are many trade-offs. And so how do we really balance these things? How do we find solutions for these things? And that's one of the areas that we want to help companies and help individuals really figure out. We recognize this is as much education as anything else.
Absolutely. As you look at some of these technology, we were kind of joking earlier about just all the buzzwords in terms of, AI, blockchain, VR, AR. Which do you think out of those, as you kind of look at their impact on how people work, which do you think will have the biggest impact in the long run?
That's hard. It's like picking from your children. I really love all of these technologies. I think they're all fantastic, but every single one of them is a convergence of the other. So let's look at blockchain. It's a distributed database. Are there times when you need a blockchain for everything? Absolutely not. You can definitely use centralized databases, and sometimes it's more efficient and it makes more sense. AR, VR, fantastic technology. We have issues now of, chromatic aberration where you're going to see colors on the sides. You're going to see screen door effects. You're going to see, you have a limited field of view. That's all going to improve over time, but that's an optics issue. And that's more of a graphics card, pushing pixels. Where everything that ties all these things together is AI. AI is the A in DAO, which means a distributed autonomous organization. So if you're going to have an organization that runs on code, if you're going to have a headset that can interpret the world through the cameras and sensors in it, if you're going to have a blockchain that can help you interpret information, and you have a whole bunch of needles across multiple haystacks where you need to find data, AI is the solution for all of these things. But at the moment, it's very specialized, and there is no general one-size-fits-all solution of AI.
That makes sense. So it's really about how these things grow together, not one over the other.
It's really the conversion. It's like that you saw that image of Radio Shack with all these different gadgets, and they've all converged into the iPhone. That's kind of where we're heading with these buzzword salads. These technologies and tools will converge and merge to become something new. I think probably one of the things that's really important is we have to really think beyond just the standard way of capitalism. It's a fantastic model because it's produced the most abundance we've ever seen in the history of this planet. And at the same time, it's the worst system for distribution. Where you have a small portion. We've heard it all through the 2016 campaign and all over the news, right? You have a small portion that holds a vast majority of all the resources. And if that continues, it is unsustainable. That, on top of automation, AI, some of these things that are happening, you have the perfect storm. And what we see and what we want to wake up every day on a Monday morning really excited for is being able to solve these hard problems and being able to think, how could we build a system that rethinks all of the incentivization around employees, and doesn't, you don't have a team where you say we're a team, but then you elbow the guy in the face next to you to take his promotion, that kind of stuff. And what we want to do is build a much better system that's free of politics, that doesn't require piles of student debt. Because I think that the rules we were taught when we were kids about how to be successful, all those rules have largely changed. You can't write off your student debt. They're all the things you presumed about how to be successful in this world. This world has changed and it's going to continue to change. And we need to be preparing our kids for the world of 2035, 2040, not 1995. That time is done. And we move on. So I think that's one area that I think we need to really think about is how do we reallocate the surplus to that back to workers? I think that's a really important thing that we need to consider, and not just giving people free money in a UBI measurement.
Yeah, that's fascinating because it is, using, in a sense, it's kind of like using capitalism to create a more socialist society to some degree, or a more balanced.
We joke that we're like the Mobius strip. If you took, you have socialism on one side and you have libertarianism on the other, and you wrap them around and make them touch. That's kind of what we're realizing that's the warp hole to solving some of these problems.
It feels like I don't have to be rich to create some of these solutions, or I just have to have some knowledge and some drive to get my hands into these things and create possible solutions or possible systems. Rather than, in the industrial era, you had to have millions of dollars to create that factory, or, you had to put a lot of capital down to create, your tools. There was a huge wall there that you had to get through. Do you feel like technologies are more accessible, and therefore are we heading in a new direction where the distribution of power is going to change?
Man, heavy question at the end. The early part of your question about technology, I think that if you had one focus, and you're someone who lives in the Bronx, or you live in Oakland, or you're in Johannesburg, or you're somewhere in a place where you don't have access to the upward mobility that other people do across regions, we think that those barriers will come down. Mm-hmm. You see now, even already, people leaving Silicon Valley because the cost of living is so high. The benefits aren't necessarily there. And you can build a company from anywhere. You've been seeing the rise of initial coin offerings as alternative ways of raising capital. So that rather than going one-to-one on an investor, you can do a public sale. So there's all kinds of different things people are doing now. But one thing that is true is that technology really is it is the access point to democracy. And the more and more that we can promote and educate these tools and help people realize it's hustle, it's believing in yourself, it's not believing these tools are made by gods, or that any of these other kingmakers somehow have, because you didn't go to Stanford, you didn't work at Google, you now have no possibility of playing in this world. I think that's not true. I think that these new tools and this time is different, and it's a great time to jump in.
It puts stress on what is the value of a college degree.
Yeah, it's a social currency. And I think what we've seen is that it's a centralized social currency. And as education becomes more and more decentralized through the internet, and it will continue harder, become more decentralized, the value of it will go down. And you have all these institutions. I'm not talking about the Harvards, Yales, and Stanfords of the world. They'll be just fine. But the ones in the middle, those groups, these more regional schools, community colleges, those will have a harder time. Mm-hmm. So it's a time of shift. It's a time of learning. But we have to adapt. I think you can't even adapt anymore. It happens so fast. You really have to anticipate the future and really realize where you want to be aligned when that time comes.
Yeah, it's fascinating.